Hello, everyone. It's actually really inspiring to see so many of you tonight. So firstly, I want to say it's a huge, huge privilege, Ashishta, to have you here with us. Your presence for what I hope will be many, many more such conversations is critical. So really, thank you for making the time for us. Harsh, we have all been deep admirers of your work and resilience. Thank you for being that inspiration for us all. Kunal, what can I say? You are brave and give us great hope. Thank you for your courage and for your articulation. And Puneet, dare I say, you are a rarity in the world of comedy.
Thank you.
He's extremely thoughtful, and I think he's somebody who is also willing to take the risk. And I'm happy now that we can call you a part of our extended G5A family, which I'm hoping to adopt all of you as well. Rajni, I'm really grateful for all your support. We've been friends for many years, but this is special, and I really enjoy working with you. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here. It is really, really important for us to see the numbers and have you all be a part of these conversations. We are all too familiar with Gandhiji's famous quote, "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." And Tagore's deeply moving poem, "Let My Country Awake." Or Dr. King's famous quote, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." And yet, I feel somehow we seem to have lost the potency of these messages, or maybe our connect with them. Or could it be that we are unable to fully comprehend just how dire our current situation is? The speakers tonight will help us understand how we got here, what is in store for us, and also connect us to the realities on ground with numbers and examples. And however scary and horrific, I have requested them not to spare us. And like in the case of the climate crisis, we must heed the urgency of this situation. Apologies for this somber note, and I don't mean to be a voice of doom, but times are such, and we need to step out of our privileged beings and truly get out there. So this evening, I have a huge ask of all of you, and this comes with no presumptions, no judgments, maybe just as a reminder or a reinforcement. One, to be more mindful of how we behave, what we say, and the choices we make. Two, to listen well and deep. And three, to care enough. Enough to take action in any small way, but to take action. We are here to explore varied perspectives on love, hate, empathy, and the forgotten art of listening, especially to the other. With listening, we hope come small pockets of understanding and compassion within us. Let us together find and connect these pockets. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Rajni. Here's to listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anuradha. And big thanks to G5A, the whole community, for its courage and vision in hosting this discussion and bringing us together. We live in times which are so troubled that such courage is a beacon and we should never take it for granted. We live in a time when hate is systematically being manufactured. You will hear much more about the details of that. But our purpose here today is neither to lament nor to wallow. Nor are we here to speak of shallow or false optimism. And certainly not to look for any quick and easy solutions. we are gathered here today to think together. And that actually is what has built civilization for centuries. You know, the ability of collectives for an entire samaj to think together. So we seek to better understand what is churning within us, each one of us, and around us in the society and the samaj. So this is an open space, but with a very firm foundation. And that foundational premise is that dignity of all must be respected under all circumstances. There can be no compromise on respect for life and for the dignity of everyone. Now, from this firm foundation, we are free to explore ideas and phenomenon that may severely challenge some of us, may momentarily even look threatening. And yet we will attempt to listen deeply in the interest of that better and deeper understanding that can lead us to higher levels and subtler levels of both creativity and constructive action in our individual life and within all the collectives that we are part of, family, workplace, and other forums and communities. My role here today is to hold the space for this exploration, in which we will be guided by both two veterans and two young people who are out there. All of them are out there in the frontiers of this challenge. So I'm not going to say anything very much at this stage, but I will take the liberty to share, I reveal my core faith, which underlines my own understanding of these issues. One is that the worst enemy of love is cynicism, not hate. Hate is an outgrowth of that cynicism. And two, that pessimism is for better times. We don't have the luxury. We simply do not have, we cannot afford to be pessimistic. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not an approaching locomotive. It is when moral laziness throws up a fog of self-doubt that hate looks all-powerful. So on that note, I invite Kunal, who is a self-declared corporate survivor.
Oh, that's him.
Sorry. Modi, a Godi survivor. I got that mixed
survivor.
up.
Yeah,
we just figured out he's a Godi survivor. Because he entered journalism just when it was entering its most difficult phase.
It's Renaissance, actually. It's Renaissance.
And he has managed, defying all odds, to do some amazing, wonderful work. Hats off to you. I hope all of you have had a chance, or if not, do see his book later, H-Pop. But over to you.
Thank you, Rajni. It is very rare to find so many Mumbaikars sitting together on a working day, unless it's a house party of sorts. But I can promise you that is not the vibe that we are going to be looking for tonight. It's a fantastic opportunity, thanks to G5A, that we've all come together, and all of the people here on this side are people whose work I've been deeply inspired by, whose work I've deeply respected and admired. Puneet is in fact one of my favorite stand-up comics, and he knows this. Yep. So it's fabulous to be in such great company. It's a weird time to be here because since June 4, a lot of people feel like hawa badal rahi hai. Something is changing, right? There's almost this renewed sense of optimism among so many people. I don't share that optimism yet, at least. Right? I don't see the fact that things are changing immensely. I don't see the fact that they will change anytime soon. And that's because for a few years now, I've had the chance to look very deeply, at the grassroots level across the country, in different states, in different towns, in villages of India, just what communalism has been able to do. The way religious hate has been able to seep into the everyday fabric of life in India. And then once you see that, there's no unseeing it. Right? There's no going back and pretending like it doesn't exist, because it exists in a very, very very, very graphic manner sometimes. And you know, we have people like Harsh who've also seen so much of this and more. What I have realized is, you know, our lens of looking at what is happening in the country needs some fixing. You know, we've looked at communalism as an event of sorts almost, right? We've always thought that there's a big riot that happens, and then it's an event that we're all focused on. We think, you know, people are going to be polarized, and you know, things then go back to normal. And we're sitting in a city where it at least feels like things have gone back to normal 30 years later, since the 1992-93 riots. What's happening now is somewhat different from then. What's happening is hate is now a continuous, unrelenting, everyday process through which it's reaching all of us on an everyday basis. There's no event anymore. There's no turning off the tap. There's no big event that you can focus on and say there is this riot. Let's send in the army, like we were discussing with Harsh. Let's send in reinforcements and things will quell down. I think where we've reached is that the idea is hate becomes such an everyday process that ultimately all of us become members of the mob without us even realizing it. If you just see the kind of events that we've also been seeing somewhere in the news, a railway constable who's going around in the railway bogie has a dispute with his senior, looks around, picks up any Muslims that he can spot, and shoots them dead point blank in a railway train. Right? Just recently in Maharashtra itself, we saw this old man who's traveling from one point to another to see his daughter, carrying a couple of boxes of meat. And that alone, is enough for a group of Hindu men to come and assault him and to come and sort of, assault and drag him by his beard, give him the choicest of abuses. And the irony there is that those men were coming to Bombay because they wanted to be police officials. So what we've seen is none of these instances have featured people who are a part of a political ideology or any of these groups. We often think it's the fringe elements. We often think it's certain groups which are doing this. What I have seen is that this unrelenting hate that has been very systematically let down upon us is now making ordinary people so hateful that they feel like they want to take matters in their own hands. Right? There is this case of this teacher in Kolhapur who's teaching about rape, and suddenly a group of boys in her classroom, Rajni, stand up and say, what you're saying is wrong because we know that only Muslims commit rapes. Hindus don't rape women. And when she tries to make them understand, they record her video and they make it go viral, and she's suspended from the school for a few days. Again, they're not political party members. They're young kids of going to colleges and schools. You'll find these examples everywhere, and I can go on, but we have so many things to discuss. My brief point here is that I think we have to understand how hate is now operating. We have to understand the different mechanisms in which hate is able to reach you. And my book does make an attempt at trying to make you understand this. What I found was that there is now an entire genre of popular culture which is devoted only and only to further the ideals of Hindutva, to give you a very distorted vision of what India's past is, what our present is right now, and how our future is going to be. At the core of this pop culture are ideals or two values they constantly seek to stoke and reinforce, which is fear and anger, right? Fear and anger ultimately leading to hate towards one religion sometimes, or towards different religions, multiple religions, depending on what the occasion is. There is now music that is being created with these ideals in mind. There is poetry specially written so that it can further the ideals of Hindutva and make you fear, make you hate people of other religions. There are books exclusively written for this purpose. And And as I said, the agenda is very broad. The agenda is to take you back in the past and tell you how glorious Hindus and our past was, and how Muslims came and how invaders came of different religions and distorted that, right? The agenda is to make you go back in the past and refigure the way we think of people like Mahatma Gandhi. And Harsh will tell you a fantastic and a chilling story of how kids in a school in Delhi and multiple schools in Delhi are now reacting to images of Mahatma Gandhi, which he narrated to me during my book talk in Delhi. So we're seeing the way that our present is being reconfigured constantly, and we're made to fear the future. We are made to be told that this country is going to fundamentally change and that one religion is going to overtake the others. The problem here is that it's not the fringe anymore. It's not these random groups. It is absolutely normalized, legitimized, and furthered by the state itself. So the battle then becomes so much more harder when your prime minister goes on the stage and in his election campaigns speaks of Muslims, speaks of people of a different religion in the exact same language that I found Hindutva pop stars to be speaking, right? The book finished sometime last year, and since November the book has been out, and I wrote about this in the Wire. But Harsh, when I saw the Prime Minister's speeches, I found the exact same rhetoric and the language of a demographic change, of a vote jihad, of land jihad, right? Of Muslims being invaders, Muslims being infiltrators. So when elected officials who are meant to safeguard the Constitution, who are meant to draw you apart if you're ever found in positions where you end up hating each other or where you end up fighting each other, if the people whose job it is to protect you from hate are the ones who are pushing you into hate, what is going to happen? Right? We've seen glimpses of that. We've seen glimpses of everyday hate seeping into our lives. We've seen how people all around us now treat Muslims differently, now treat Christians differently sometimes, now treat people of different castes differently. And that is because there's been a systematic attempt at making them think of these things. It's not a coincidence that this has happened. We're more polarized than ever before, and sadly the news from my quarters is that is not changing anytime soon. Which is why this conversation then becomes so much more relevant and so much more important, because we are now facing the establishment which has declared that its intent is quite the opposite of what people on this side are trying to do, which is to unite people, right? So it's important that people who believe in the ideals that the Constitution believes in and the Constitution upholds come together and constantly critique each other, constantly listen to each other, and try and understand what we can do better, because this is the only hope we have. Spaces like these are the hope we have. We don't have a state which is going to respond to the despair that a lot of us feel here. We don't have the machinery. We don't have the bureaucracy. We sometimes don't have the judiciary also to help us when things go dire. I'm going to end there, but I hope that we're able to bring up some solutions. We're able to come up with something more than what we already brought into this room. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kunal. Of course, he doesn't end there. We will have many rounds of discussion, and then, of course, we are all going to have a conversation. So thank you, Kunal, as the opening observations. And Harsh, I'm going to request you to now share your... I want to just mention to you that Harsh's life has a BC AD. He says that before Gujarat, 2002 is the BC part of his life. And the present is unfortunately a sad AD, but...
AD is after democracy, is it?
Huh? Yeah. Harsh, over to you.
So Kunal, I think Kunal's book and how much he cares about what he's observed on the ground is this slow daily injection of hate I've looked at, as a civil servant for many years, I've handled riots. Riots used to be big explosions of hate. There used to be a spectacular sort of manufacture of hate, and riots had a beginning and they had an end. We've entered into a very different phase. I mean, he's talked very eloquently in his book about this daily exposure to hate and what it's doing to us. I'd like to talk about what its consequences are on the ground. What we are doing collectively to our 200 million Muslim brothers and sisters. What we are complicit in doing with our silences and with our appreciation in many cases. I believe, in fact, that we and I'll make a somewhat, very grim, I'll tell you some very grim stories. Because I think we need to confront some realities. I think we're in the midst, I'm convinced that we're in the midst of a deep civilizational crisis. Across the world, we are choosing, more and more people are choosing leaders who are teaching us to hate. But in India, I think we've gone further. Hate is now not just normal, it's legitimate, but it's also valorized. You're heroic if you hate. I can only prove that I love my religion by hating another religion. I can only prove that I love my country by hating another country. And what is it doing to us? And I'm speaking in 2017 when lynching started becoming, part of our lives. I felt troubled by our collective silence. And I believe that there's something that we needed to do. I made a call saying, I've learned from Gandhi, from Martin Luther King, that hate, if you respond to hate with hate, you're only going to deepen hate. Can we have a politics of love? Radical love, and perhaps later I'll talk a little more about radical love. But I made a call to set out on a journey. And initially it was one journey, and we've not stopped. It's been about 50 journeys now. And I don't know how much in the rest of my life, how many more journeys I'm fated to make. The journey would be to the home. We resolved that we would go to the home of every person who's lost loved ones to lynching. We would not go like fact finders. We would not go as human rights workers. We'd go like you'd go to the home of somebody you love, to whom this has happened. And what would we do? We would do about 4 things. We'd say, first, we want you to know that you're not alone, that there are people who care. And many times we end up crying with them. Then we would say we seek forgiveness for what we've become as a people. We pledge that we will be with you as you pick up the broken pieces of your life, as you fight for justice, and we will tell your story. And the telling of the story is extremely important, I've learned. The acknowledgement is the beginning of any process of healing. Let me sort of briefly summarize what, and I'm conscious of my time, what have I seen in these journeys? I was warning Rajni that once I start, it'll be hard to stop. But let me talk about a few things. The first is the enormous cruelty that has got unleashed among ordinary people. I mean, we have family after family tells us, I wish they just shot him. I wish they just stabbed him. Why did they have to torture him so much? Why did they have to gouge out his eyes? And place after place, I mean, let me talk about, say, Hapur. just close to Delhi. There's a middle-aged man who's very poor, and everybody knows him in a village. And he used to buy small goats and fatten them up or something. You announce from the temple thing that he's killed a cow. And a whole crowd gathered. A lot of them children, teenagers. And the family told us later that, there was not a part of his body which hadn't been pierced. People had gathered with screwdrivers, and this is with somebody you regard as your uncle. Where is this cruelty coming from? I've seen, lynching after lynching, the videos that they prepare. One thing that is a recurring pattern after a period of time, when you've lost, and it goes on for 2 hours, 3 hours, you're losing blood. Before you become unconscious, one of the last things they do is to ask for water. And the triumph is to deny them water before they finally lose consciousness. There is, just in Delhi, exactly a year ago, in the Ganesh Pandal was there, a banana. This young Muslim man who was slightly mentally challenged went out. He was hungry. He picked up the banana from the pandal, ate it. They tie him up to a post, and they beat him and they beat him and they beat him. When his father, when I spoke to him later, he was saying that he ate a banana and they killed him. He took me to the place, and I'll always remember because it was in the center. It wasn't some isolated place. It was in the center of an extremely crowded low-income settlement. For 2 to 3 hours, he was crying out in pain. Some 5,000-10,000 people, I calculated, must have passed that way. Not one person came to protect him, to help him. What's happened to us? I don't care about Modi. I care about us. I care about what are we becoming as a people? How can we let this happen? And how are we letting this happen? I am long for somebody to, tell me that did someone save your life? Did somebody come in? And repeatedly, we've done now about 50 journeys, about 150 families, I think, over these years. And I just don't get stories about people saving lives, trying to come in, trying to protect. There's this, I think you need to understand what is, very rightly, he spoke about the difference. We've had communal violence, much larger numbers. I mean, a single Gujarat, the Sikh riots, Nelly was probably the biggest. You'll have far more people killed in a single episode than in all the lynchings over the last 7-8 years. So you'll say, what is the big deal? Please understand that lynching is a whole new, it's what I would call performative violence. It's violence as theater, and it goes back to the American lynchings, which literally were performances, because you'd have this African-American man and crowds used to gather with families, like picnics, and used to watch while they cut off his fingers, cut his genitals, hang him with great cruelty. Here, the performance is replaced by the video camera. Each of these are videotaped by the perpetrators, and that, of course, says that they're convinced about that nothing is going to happen to them, and that they're going to be heroes. And they circulate it to millions, and people consume this. Now, please understand, I'm an African-American historian, said every lynching was like 1,000 lynchings that reverberate across the land, the rivers, and so on, and settle as fear in the heart of every African-American. I think every lynching in India is like at least 10,000 lynchings, which reverberate across the land and rivers. Take an example. One boy is lynched on a train, Junaid. I have found, Muslim young men have told me across the country that they're terrified to travel in a train Every time they go on a train, their mother says, don't say salam alaikum when don't get into a discussion. Never share your food. Political discussion, just keep low. One lynching and the kind of fear that it has created. When Kunal spoke about those 3 men being killed by the security guard, the next morning, a young colleague who works with me, a woman colleague, she came into my office and she started sobbing. And I said, what's happened? What's happened? She said, after that, after I got this news, I cannot sleep, I cannot think. I said, why? She said, the one thought that keeps coming into my heart and mind is that those men could have been my father, that man could have been my brother. Where do I go? And while she was speaking, I was saying, we have 200 million Muslim brothers and sisters in this country. This conversation must have happened in maybe 1 million homes. What did our Prime Minister do? I wrote an article, the speech that Mr. Modi did not make. And I started off by saying, I am so deeply distressed that this has happened. And in the end, he says, I'm doing this for Modi and Yogi. I said, I'm even more distressed that this has happened in my name. I assure every Muslim in this country, citizen of this country, that you are our brothers and sisters, equal citizens in every way. This is a speech he did not make. Even Trump, after George Floyd made a speech, said it was terrible. Even Macron did when police violence again and killed a teenager. We don't even find the need to make this statement. What is happening to the radicalization of the Hindu heart and mind is what we are seeing. A very rapid deterioration in the quality of our heart and mind. And I could go on, but let me hand over to.
Thank you, Harsh. I think we'll take a few moments just to be quiet. I think, like we do when somebody dies, we have a moment of silence before we proceed further.
Would you like to complete it?
Yeah, I'm saying we're just taking it's so strange because Harsh has not said anything that I don't already know in the bare facts, and yet to hear it recounted,
To bear witness, actually, that is.
and to be that's it. We are all protected, Harsh. We all most of us lead very protected lives, and so in a sense, what I think we're all picking up is your vibrational field, because you have taken the trouble to physically put yourself in the middle of the suffering, and I think that's what we are seeking to honor with that moment of silence. That's a very difficult person to follow, Puneet, but this is the nature of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of my art form as well. In general, in comedy, we're trying to make people laugh against their will. In India especially, I feel. Even in a dark room, it's almost like they seek permission to laugh. That mom is watching from somewhere. Yahan pe bhi. I've been doing comedy for nearly a decade now, and increasingly it's been a journey of me realizing that practicing art itself in a developing country is a privilege. Just to be able to express yourself beyond your, say, immediate friend circle or family is a privilege. And I come from I would say, fairly well-to-do background, not moneyed background, but in the Indian context. And that also has been a journey of realizing the layers of privilege that I sit upon right now. And I sort of grew up thinking that anybody who pursues the arts or anything which is creative in nature will be kind by default. But that is clearly not the case from what we see, what Kunal has to say. And that's because you are a product of the milieu that you grew up in. There are many theories on this, about violence in general, and that we are tribal at the very core of our hearts. But I think the life that you lead, the experiences that you had leading up to that point, really decide the way you express yourself. Sometimes the expressions that come out in Kunal's books are creative, rather creative, I would say. Yeah. And yet they're filled with so much hate, at the bottom of it. And you can get into the history of it and the history of violence. Osho says that history misses the silences, only records the violences. There are enough silences out there to take comfort in, but they don't get recorded because the victors write history, right? But I feel at heart we are a deeply unequal society, and we always have been. In a country where a majority is deeply downtrodden and kept that way systematically because of their caste, can never speak about kindness, not with a straight face at least. Even in the most privileged households, who famously keep claiming that caste system has been abolished because I don't practice it actively. Even they have nannies, and that itself is an ugly thing to see when a child, right from birth, at a pre-verbal stage, at the point where the child doesn't even have a sense of self, let alone an ego, he grows up seeing that there are two kinds of human beings. One that you can treat slightly badly and it's okay. And they keep coming back to work the next day. And imagine how ingrained it is in your psyche as you grow up. Then if you claim that I don't practice untouchability, that means nothing. And it's been a journey for me also realizing that as somebody who's from an upper caste background. And I feel in a society like that is always been fertile grounds for hate. Because the very basis of anything progressive should be equality. A very basic equality. And we don't have that. And that's why it's so easy to let this culture of compliance set in, which you've seen over the last decade or so. It's a culture of compliance. And the reason why we go along is because there are people who are worse off than you. In the cities, you don't realize what a pathetic life you're living. In the most expensive city in the world, you don't have clean air to breathe. Your water is polluted. You have no public spaces to speak of. And yet you play along because the people who are worse off than you. Is it not? So I feel there's a hierarchy of needs and you're stuck in the middle somewhere. I went to Australia earlier this year because I don't like saving money. and then everything works so perfectly that it made me angry for a while. How can everything work so beautifully? But of course, as a country, things become simpler once you kill all the natives off. We tried it in India, it didn't work. There's too many of us. But one thing I noticed, which me and Kunal were discussing, was that I was there for nearly 2 months, and I can't for the life of me recall anyone using a mobile phone. Like, I just didn't see them. And nobody charging their phones also. In India, it's always a race to the finish. Ki mujhe charge karna hai 5%, please, mera baki hai thoda, please. Always the phone needs charging. Because if you look around, everybody's in the phone all the time. And I feel that's because there's nothing of beauty to look at outside the phone. The phone is an immediate escape in front of you. It's like the Matrix is here, it's just not as sleek as in the movies it is. I travel by local trains, and often you see people who are laborers who walk in with huge sacks on the back. They keep it down, they're sweating. The moment they sit down, the phone is on and he's escaped into a different universe. The moment the phone dies, you look up, there's nothing which is even aesthetic to look at. You have no public spaces, you have no recreation, and you have nothing which is even in the slight bit pleasant to look at. Our cities are so ugly, they are so filthy, and we are living with that. No? Why? Because you feel you're already privileged, no, over a majority of the population. And while these are big questions to address, even, I think that's at the heart of it. And you can only improve it one individual at a time. While we do practice our art, and there are, of course, activists who are doing a great job without reward, unless that consciousness seeps in, as an individual, as a society, if at all you talk about unity, diversity is only performative at best. Because I feel the very basics of life have not been addressed in this country. So every individual who buys into the hate that we read of, he's not even a complete individual, because he identifies with his religion so highly that he has no sense of self. He's not even autonomous, I would say, to an extent, because he's so deeply reliant on his clan, his community, his caste, that he can be easily manipulated. It's so easy to do it at a mass level when you have budget, especially. And you have all the budgets in the world at this point. And it's a question I often come across as an artist also, and maybe later in the discussion I will address what I personally am trying to do about it. But as Harsh was talking about the lynchings, and we all felt a sense of dread, right? And I often come across arguments from people who don't agree with what I do, and they always talk about, but what about? There's always a but involved. No matter, you say there are 30,000 people who died in Gaza, but what about? And how can a but follow that statement? No, but it does, right? It always does, because maybe there's some kernel of historical fact that they base this on. Call it the invasions or the conversions, or whatever it is. And what came to my mind right now was that every act of violence, or every act of hate reverberates throughout the ages. You are seeing a reflection of what has happened hundreds of years ago in this country playing out in the politics of today as well. And while that is dreadful, I would also like to believe that every act of kindness also reverberates throughout the centuries. If not, then in the nuclear age, there would be no Buddha still in the world, right? But the Buddha exists, and many Buddhas exist in the world. And I'm sure, despite the onslaught that you see right now, Gandhi will also persist for centuries to come, because even that act of kindness will have a bearing for years to come. So I sort of tend to follow that in my work at an individual level, and maybe when we come back in the discussion, I'll talk more about it. But thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. So, as those of you who know me know that I have a very privileged life, and one of the greatest privileges of that life is that Ashis Nandy has been my mentor for easily about 35 years. And don't blame him for anything that I do. But the fact is that a lot that I get up to is because of him. And a great portion of that, I mean, you all know that he is our foremost expert on understanding the DNA of violence. But I want to just add that one of the ways in which he cared for all of us youngsters was that he knew everyone's Achilles heel. And in my case, he knew I have a terrible fear of violence. So some 25 years ago, he sent me to interview Madan Pava. See, he still gets a chuckle out of it. Madan Pava was about 18 or 19 years old in 1947. And he was one of the people, he was actually the boy carrying the bomb. You know, there's a failed attempt on Gandhi's life. Yep. Just a little before 30th Jan. They bungled, the bomb went off at the wrong time, etc. Anyway, so Madan Pava was part of that plot, and he was convicted, etc. Anyway, after serving a life sentence of 20 years, he came out. I mean, this is only Ashis Da. He not only knew where to find Madan Pava, but he sent me to interview him when Pava was
It's a
on.
very good job.
No, that I don't know. So I just wanted to contextualize for you that I think the greatest gift, Ashis Da, is that you not only have studied the DNA of violence, हम बच्चों को आपने उसको confront करना सिखाया. So I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. Over to you.
Well, partly because I found that Madanlal Pawar, towards the end of his life, has claimed that he was a humanist, has become a humanist. And Rajni, of course, confronted them and so on and so forth. And also, how does he turn out as humanist? He said, gave certain clues, and strangely enough, these clues could be compared with Gandhi's concept of non-violence. This is as far as that goes. So there is always within a person potentialities of a different kind. And unless we capture both, we don't have the right to pass judgment straight away. Madanlal Pava, remember, both to you and to me, sang out the qawwalis that at Baba Farid's mausoleum in Montgomery in Pakistan,
Yeah.
when he was a child, he used to go and he sang out those qawwalis to us, in his 80s, and consider, and also said, though that what is this but called good manners.
Tamiz. Tamiz and tehzeeb. Tamiz, Punjabi.
Tamiz.
Tehzeeb, Tamiz.
Learning Tamiz, you have to go to Muslims.
He said that.
So there is that part of the story. I will also try to tell you one more thing, that we live in a world, I mean, I'm glad that at least two of us, you particularly, have associated nation state with hatred. And I think this is justifiable. In about towards the end of the 20th century, the Nobel Committee had organized a conference on hatred. 5-day conference on hatred for 1 week, more or less. That's the way we were brought up. That I was there, and many people were there. World leaders were there. And in none of the 5 days, I heard the word love. Now, there were attempts to resist hatred, but it was seen mainly as a job of law, how the laws are there in your country, and also the demand that you can control the hatred by politics. You can see it, but hatred is still not only a powerful emotion, it has already been weaponized all over nation state. So there is also the other part of the story that if you want to check hatred, you must have counter hatred. Recognize the counter hatred. For those for whom you amass hatred, you might find that later on that they also hate you. And then, of course, you have to have a different kind of step there. I remember once I was interviewing, I was going to say this to today in the afternoon. KPS Gill, I interviewed KPS Gill and Jagmohan as people who were rather tough cookies in handling riots and so on and so forth.
And terrorists,
Yeah.
so-called.
So, KPS Gill, when I asked him that can love be a response to hatred, he said, forget love. I will tell you my experience. I came here at a time when there was a communal riot started. Now, I have a theory that communal riots, if they last for 2 hours, is a different thing, because that's maybe a matter of anger, matter of hate, whatever it might be. But that can be handled. Often you find it in the cities. But if it is more than 4 to 6 hours, then there is politics behind it. So no hatred lasting more than 4 hours can be only hatred. And maybe under the hatred there is politics. So this can be taken very far, because I have a lot of data on this. So he said he called all the parties, leaders, to come and meet him at his office and told them exactly what I'm telling you, that, gentlemen, if the riot has lasted more than 2 hours, because I believe that if 2 hours after a 2 hour long riot can be an accident, and I don't mind it. But once you have already crossed 4 hours. So now I give you 2 hours, and I know what to do with you people here. And he took out his gun and put it on the table. He said the riot stopped within 1 hour. So there is another kind of medicine for hatred. But anyway, I will like to also give one or two examples of why this can be also another way to look at it. Nelson Mandela had been a freedom fighter in South Africa against apartheid. He had been member of the Communist Party, talking of revolution and violence. Then he was actually set up a revolutionary party against preaching violence. And after that, when he was confined in the jail in Robben Island, he thought, along with his associates, who were all sent to Robben Island, to have discussions every day. And he felt that this culture of hate cannot be allowed to stay. We will be, and also, fortunately, people knew that while he was in violent movements and so on and so forth, he personally disliked violence. That also was an advantage. And as a result, when the settlement was made, he was elected president. And the first thing he did was to invite his African torturers, his jailers, and those who were confined in Robben Island, and went to them personally and welcomed them to the new republic. So there is a way of also the other way, without making too much of talk of love. So that's our one. This I want to say. The one last thing I want to say, that in our survey, we did a large study on the partition violence. Frankly, in our survey, nearly more than 90% of the respondents, when asked which part of your life was the most beautiful, or you remember most, they would invariably say it was the time before the partition violence, and they would also add that then there was no communal system. Now, they said it in such a loud voice that one American scholar said that this cannot be. This is all mythic. This is something that they have concocted to console themselves. So he found out that no, violence and hatred was less, but there were earlier. But it is interesting that this result was proved again when Dipesh Chakraborty went to we went by village, and every village said that those were the best days of our time, life. And the reason is this, that we had such fellowship amongst us that we couldn't think of anything else. Similarly, this was also endorsed, not only by our survey, this was endorsed in the Bosnian case. Bosnian case, exactly the same. The victims said that those were the days. They said there was no difference between the Bosnians, Muslims, and the Bosnian Serbs. But this was triggered by a few chosen people. And the situation went out of control. So there is that part of the story too. And if I can say, if I want to add, I can say in the last word that when I asked my Pakistani friends, because we couldn't transfer money to them. Government didn't allow us to transfer money to them, but we could invite them. So they had on their own had a survey, and a small survey. They also found exactly the same thing on the Pakistan side. That's that. So this, so much for hatred and its medicine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. In the mid-80s, UNESCO commissioned a group of scholars to look at the question of violence and war. And I would request or suggest that if you're more interested in the background of what Ashis Da is saying, you should look up the Seville Statement on War. It's all up there on the internet. Ashis Da is one of the co-authors, there are two main authors, and Ashis Da is, and the basic point of that, it was a long process. I think 2 years you all worked on it, and it was a group of both natural and social scientists who brought a whole body of language together, a whole body of knowledge, with which they concluded that war is not natural to human beings. Because through the 19th century, with the whole Hobbesian view that life is short, nasty, and brutish, there was a powerful grip of the idea that the human being is fundamentally violent. And all love and cooperation and brotherhood is just once in a while it holds sway, but fundamentally we are violent. And there is now a large body of scientific research which is showing that is not true. And that is, I thought, a good segue for the next round of our reflections, which is to look at, so where do we go? I think Ashis Da has already, opened the way for that. And I'll just share two stories with you, which maybe help us to move in that direction of reflecting on how do we creatively and constructively live in our present moment, keeping in the foreground all the horrific details that we are looking at face to face. So one is an incident of lynching that happened in Rajsamand district. This was quite a while back. It was one of the early cases where not only it happened, this Muslim laborer, I think from Bengal, was beaten and burnt, but the man doing it made his own nephew take a video of it.
Take a?
Video of it. Now, this happened to be right in the backyard of my friends who are part of Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, Aruna Roy and Nikhil Day. And so I made a condolence call to them. And Nikhil said something very fascinating. He said, it's true that if you saw that, if you talk to people just now, because I called him the day I got the news, so it was all still very raw. He said, if you talk to people in a crowd in the village or in that area, they're all cheering for it and they all sound very ugly. But he said, I talked to a few of them later, one-to-one, at the chai shop. And the same person talks and behaves very differently.
Yes.
In that personal conversation, they are not cheerleading for the lyncher. So I just want to distinguish, I think we do need to distinguish the mass mind, and maybe this is my naive hope, that the mass mind has a fragile moment in which it holds sway. I'm not, again, I've said before, I'm not going to hold out any false hope, but it just has something to explore. And I'll give you a more concrete example, again from Rajasthan. You can see the details of this. Bhavar Meghvanshi is a human rights activist. He's of Dalit background. And yet he has made it a point to work as a democratic rights and human rights activist, though he is very much also raising the Dalit issue. So one of the things that was happening, maybe it still happens in some parts of Rajasthan, is that if a Dalit bridegroom was going for in his marriage procession on a horse,
Yes.
there were organized groups that were pulling him down. how dare you? As a Dalit, how dare you go on a ghodi to get married? So Bhavar and his friends opened a dialogue with the Jati Panchayat of the community that was most often doing this in villages. And it was a slow process, but it was successful. And at least from the top, the leaders of that Jati Panchayat issued a message or whatever, put it down the chain of communication that this is not on. And as this dialogue kind of came to completion, Bhamar said, I gifted them 2 things. One was the Constitution of India, a full copy. And the other, he said, was a portrait of Buddha.
What?
Portrait of Buddha. Because it was a Rajput group, na? That was doing the violation. He says, I gave them a portrait of Buddha to say कि देखो ये आप ही की तरह क्षत्रिय थे और इन्होंने दुनिया को क्या संदेश दिया तो इस पे हम लोग मिल पे क्यों ना आज कुछ करें. Bhavar is not saying the problem is solved for all times. He's not saying that it's solved in all of Rajasthan. But the fact that it worked even in this one situation is significant. This is if you want to watch the conversation, it's part of the Ahimsa conversation series in which he describes this whole incident. So I thought maybe in this next round, can we look at what are the nuances which give us some clues on kya kahe, the wedges. What are the cracks through which the sunlight is coming through? Because we know for sure that it's not absolute darkness.
Pardon me?
We know for sure that it's not absolute darkness.
Yes.
I must tell you, I have this reliably from a Pandit ji. I asked him, I said, जी ये कलयुग कितना देर चलने वाला है? Please बता दो, अभी बहुत हो गया.
अभी तो अमृत काल है.
नहीं तो.
This is अमृत काल है.
So the poor Pandit, he saw कि ये थोड़ा human rights case है. This lady is very upset. तो he said, नहीं मैडम आप घबराइए मत, पर अभी तो शुरू हुआ है. Then he saw that I'm looking even more upset. So he says, नहीं पर आप चिंता मत करिए. कलयुग का मतलब ये नहीं होता कि सभी लोग जो है वो मतलब
शैतानी करेगा.
हाँ मतलब हाँ सभी लोग मतलब क्या what is the हिंदी for cruelty? क्रूरता पे नहीं उतरते. क्योंकि he said, no, I think this theological view is of importance, because he said because then there's no creation. If darkness is complete, then the game is over. And the very logic of creation of this Shrishti is that game must go on.
Yeah.
So how? Let's have a round of sharing thoughts on how is the game to go on, and not necessarily, at the moment on specifically what we can do. We'll come to that also.
Ji.
But just what are your philosophical?
I feel every yug calls itself Kalyug to absolve itself of its sins. No?
Yeah. Sahi baat.
There has been no Satyug ever, there has been no Dwapar, it's always been the same.
Yeah.
But it's so convenient to call it Kalyug. It's the same as saying कि सब politician चोर हैं. We are like this only. Let the status quo prevail. And if you go into the scriptures, the Gita itself says that the primary quality of Kalyug will be the caste barriers will break down. Which seems like a nice thing to happen. No? So often what yug it is also a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
Increasingly I realized that there is no middle class in this country. It's just rich people and people who serve them. And often it's frustrating for someone who is in media, to use a broad sense, that your audience already is on your side. they are also privileged. They agree with you. No, but then the so what comes in. Because the masses are desperately trying to just make their ends meet. No. To use a very graphic example, in the lockdown, when you saw the migrant workers walking back hundreds of kilometers, there was an active debate raging on Twitter as to whether this is the government's doing or not. But no migrant worker was there on Twitter, surprisingly, no, arguing for his side of the story. So I often feel that then the onus lies with the so-called middle class or people who have any voice to make some sense out of everything. No, it's always the privileged class, more or less, who can make a difference. No, it's very nice to hope for a Spartacus to come, but in the end, Lincoln had to free the slaves, right? And a Nehru had to come and bankroll the Congress. No, and I'm sure Nehru would have been more likable if he was a chaiwala himself. But would it have helped our cause? Maybe not. No.
Yeah.
So against the run of play, somebody who has the bandwidth has to stand up and at least make his voice heard. And many of us do. But then what happens is the ego very quickly takes over. No? So for someone like me who in the flagrantly ignorant stand-up scene of the country tries to make a politically correct statement or a socially relevant statement, we are faced with commercial questions of whether you will be employed for a corporate show next season or will a brand work with you. No? And then often the choice to make is between the numbers and between integrity. No? Just yesterday after my show, 2 people come to meet me from the audience. They're also aspiring comics. And they say, sir, I follow your work and because of you, I started reading Krishnamurti. But other comics told me that ये सब मत पढ़ फिर तू कमा नहीं पाएगा. And such a telling statement, no? Because the deeper you dive into philosophy or something of value, the further you drift away from the market, no? From the mainstream and where the money is. No? So I often resisted this sort of decision to go into activism or stay with the artistic side of it. And often where I end this dialogue in my head is that मैं कलाकार हूँ, मैं प्रवक्ता नहीं हूँ. अगर आप प्रवक्ता हो तो आप numbers chase करते हो and you do whatever is necessary to get those numbers by your side. No? And to quote Osho again, he says the politician and revolutionary are the same people. The revolutionary is in the opposition. And the politician is the guy in power, right? And they play musical chairs often. And I often see that with activists also. No, they also chase glory. They also chase numbers. But at the same time, there's so many activists I know who are quietly laboring away in one corner of the country against all odds. No, because more than any of us, Harsh will tell you the onslaught on all NGOs in the country for the last 10 years or so. It's been so massive that in one statement you can just say that basically anybody who's kind is a target. No, because you already won the war comprehensively. No, yet you want to bludgeon any opposition, and the opposition here is anybody with a kind heart. And yeah, because every last sane voice counts. No? And in the mix of all of this, in the media that we live in today, I try to simplify my pursuits in life, and thankfully I have enough to get by. And only recently I realized that 10 years after leaving my job, a pretty decent corporate job, I am making the same amount of money I was making 10 years back. And the world has changed, right? Inflation has been a bitch for the last 1 year itself. If you multiply by 10, somehow I have survived, no? Because I have simplified my decisions down to the fact that what is my goal in life. And my abiding goal now is to just maintain sanity.
Well said.
Yeah.
There can be no larger goal in life. We live in an absolutely insane world. In a world where the glaciers are melting, you sip half a sip of water and throw the plastic bottle away like it's going to disappear from there. Is that not insane? No. You treat each other so unkindly. No. And yet you claim to be a decent citizen of this world. Is that not insane? No. Your roads are a mess. There's filth everywhere, but you will buy a house in DLF and think that you made it in life. Is that not insane? So, in a world which is so crazy, I think simply maintaining your sanity is already you doing your part. And the reason why I feel people in power are so paranoid is because every last voice of sanity and last voice calling for peace bothers them. Because I tend to feel that increasingly power is absolute. It has to be absolute, otherwise it is not power. It's like a black hole almost. It sucks you in, and unless it sucks everything in, it's not satisfied.
Yeah.
So while it's often justified to feel helpless, like people in the environmental movement will tell you that you often get told that your little charade is not helping. The world is gonna sink anyway. The same way with hatred. What are you going to do against the largest machinery of propaganda that has been seen in history? But I feel every last voice matters. And to feel that you alone will make a difference is also problematic. Because that's a sign of ego. You're the same person you're fighting. Just you don't have the budgets again.
Yeah.
So while it seems like all hope is lost, but I think every individual is also a ray of hope. But at the same time, you have to keep your ego in check. You do it because you firmly believe in it, not because you'll get to talk about it on a stage in G5A someday. And it's a daily struggle. It's not like I've overcome it, but that's my guiding principle. And in a country like India, of today especially, if you get a stage to talk about anything that you want to, and in comedy I choose to speak on my last date that did not go well, I can't sleep that night because I wasted my God-given stage time. Free platforms are so rare in this country now, I can't tell you. Everything is so leveraged and so commercial that every last space or even 10 people are listening to you is also a blessing, I feel. And that's how I look at it, and that's how I pursue it in my little corner of stand-up comedy. And maybe that's the hope that you will see reflected in what the other panelists also say from their sphere of work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Harsh, you were talking earlier about how actually love is frightening to those in power. You want to share that experience? You have several experiences, actually. He's not just saying this in abstract. He said it's the one thing they find threatening, it's love. What does that mean?
Yeah, I've seen with this regime, I mean, I'm now charged with virtually every agency of the central government is charging me with a whole range of crimes. I can spend this life and the next in prison. And what am I speaking about? I'm saying let's just live together with respect and peace and love. Why is that such a dangerous idea? But clearly,
You've been called a dangerous person. Tell us about that also.
Yeah, I mean, the word that I hear from inside the deep state over and over again about me, and it's a phrase they keep using, that he's a very dangerous man. And I look at myself and I say, wow, dangerous. And then I realize, perhaps, I look back on, I look back, look forward. Young people keep asking me, in all of this really dark time, what do we do? Firstly, of course, depoisoning a river is not easy. It's going to be the rest of my life. I think it's going to be the rest of yours. And we have to recognize that. But that doesn't mean that we don't act. The RSS is going to complete 100 years next year. They worked for 100 years to get where they have. We haven't. And that we must recognize that we haven't. Where is our conviction? Where is the depth of our conviction in acting out what we believe in? We saw one partition on the land of this country. I see today 1 million partitions in our hearts. Each one of us will have stories. What are we doing about it? What can we do about it? So let me throw out a couple of ideas very quickly. One of them is what I call radical love. Radical love, I mean, whatever Ashish might have said about love, radical love, to my mind, is love that is based on immense courage and conviction. I mean, I can, I love you so much that I can give my life for you. And it's not an abstract idea. And I think perhaps its finest example, very close to us, is Gandhiji's the last months of his life. Just imagine 1 million people slaughtered each other. Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, more or less in equal numbers, Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh. And another country had been constituted on the basis of religion. Rivers of blood were flowing. 15 million people had been displaced from their homes, including my own family, under great violence. It seemed, almost obvious. They have got their Pakistan. We will be a land for Hindus. And we decided, no, India would be a country which would welcome everybody who wants this country to be theirs. It will not matter which God you worship and which God you don't worship, or you worship no God. It will not matter what your caste you're in. We imagined that we would build a country that would accept us for what we are. Biden recently said America is the only country which is an idea more than a piece of geography. I think India is a country which is actually an idea. It's an idea that you belong, and you belong equally. It's an idea of a country that is kind and equal and just. And I think that, and Gandhiji's, let me talk about a couple of examples just from the last, what inspires me so much. We were celebrating our freedom. He was in Calcutta he went on a long fast and said, I won't eat till the last hand that is raised in hate is lowered. People tell the story of this Hindu man who goes with great anger to Gandhiji and says, what are you doing? I had a child this small. The Muslim mobs killed him. How can I overcome the hate in my heart? And he says, I'll tell you a way. Find a little boy this small, a Muslim boy whose parents have been killed by Hindu mobs, and adopt that child as your own. Raise him in his own faith. Where do we hear conversations like this? We have to find them in ourselves. And yet they do exist. In Calcutta, during the journeys of the Karwa, there was an incident where, like what's been happening, all your H-pop kind of thing. They went in front of the mosque. It was Ram Navami, and the skirmish then finally breaks out when they provoke. Riot broke out. Hindus, Muslims, etc. When they sort of looked at what has happened, 2 Hindu boys had got caught in the Muslim area, and 1 Muslim boy was caught in the Hindu area. And negotiation, you return our child, you return our children. This Imam there said, no, this is wrong, absolutely wrong. Think of what the Hindu children's parents are feeling. Give them back unconditionally. We hope they will return our boy. As it turned out, that boy was his own son. And he waits and he waits alone in the mosque till about midnight. He gets a phone call saying, from the police saying, we found your boy, but we're really sad, he's been killed. And what is the Imam's response? He says, don't tell anybody, the city will be on fire. I will tell them. And the next morning when they gather for namaz, he says, you'll notice my boy is not here. This is what has happened to him. But my son's death is a big tragedy for me, but an even bigger tragedy would be if even in your heart, you have hatred for any Muslim, any Hindu, let alone with the acts of your hand. And when we went there, the young Muslim boys were telling me, they were weeping. They said when he was telling us this, we were all set to go and set fire and kill. And instead then we went, and the Hindu shops, we stood outside and we stood guard. And when he got his boy's body, his eyes had got gouged out. And yet he was not. I mean, it is this capacity for love. And I could say a lot more. Fraternity is what we've written into our constitution. What does fraternity mean? The Hindi word is actually quite lovely. It is bandhuta. हम एक दूसरे से बंधे हुए हैं. हमारे मजहब अलग हो सकते हैं, हमारी जाति अलग, भाषा हो, but हम एक दूसरे से बंधे हुए हैं. What does that mean? It means if there are fetters on your feet, I feel my freedom has been stolen from me. If a teenage girl has got gang raped in Hathras, I feel my daughter has been gang raped. If somebody is beating Pehlu Khan on his back, the pain is so acute on my back. That is bandhuta. And lastly, I'll just say, a lot of us might say, this is too much. I mean, how can you expect us to? I mean, we couldn't be what Gandhiji did, or we can't be where the Imam Rashidi was. Many ethical systems would give you an answer, but there's something that Prophet Muhammad said, which I like a lot. He said, what is your duty as a good human being, when you witness great suffering and injustice? And he says, at the very least, respond from your heart. Care about it. Better among us, some of us will respond with our tongue. We'll speak out against it, as all of us have been. A few of us will respond with our hands, which means we'll act against it. My problem with my country is not that there are not enough of us acting with our hands, not even that there are not enough of us speaking out. My problem with my country is that there's so little of us who are responding even with our hearts. If enough of us care enough, and I really feel, if there's one solution, I mean, young people often ask me, what is that one solution? I'll say in 2 words, just be kind. Be kind, and everything else will sort it out. Lastly, something happened. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, she's sort of, for me, the most inspiring leader we've had in this century around the world. And so, I think 2016-17, a young white man from there, he, put a camera here, and he went into 2 mosques on the Friday prayers, and he killed 50 people in prayer. What does she do? Her immediate response is to do exactly what Gandhiji did, after Navkholi. What we learn to do in the Karma is to go to the people and say, I care. And she covers her head in cultural empathy. She goes, embraces, and shows how much she cares. The next decision she takes is, I'll never mention. We don't know the name of that young man. She says, I will never mention him. He is not us. The people he killed is us. And they were just 1.5% Muslim population, mostly immigrants. She said, they are us, not the person who demonstrated hate. Next Friday prayers, the azan is sounded on every TV channel and radio. People gather outside the mosques, join hands and say, we will stand guard while you pray. The imam of that mosque was then asked at the end, what are you feeling now? And he says, we are broken-hearted, but we are not broken, because New Zealand has taught us what it means to love. My problem with my country, especially with middle-class Indians and rich Indians, My problem is that we are not broken-hearted, which shows
not broken-hearted.
which shows how broken.
We're not broken-hearted enough.
We are not broken-hearted, which shows how broken we have become.
Which shows how broken we are. There's also a great deal of brokenness in the people, I think, who are churning the hate. There is a survey done recently which is showing it was specially focused on young men, that there seems to be an epidemic of young men who are feeling useless. They are feeling useless. मतलब हिंदी में वो अपने आप को नालायक मान रहे हैं.
Bekar.
Bekar and nalayak. Now this is a kind of brokenness, and I think Kunal's work is showing the ways in which this brokenness of the individual, of course it's systemic, but it's more easy to understand when we focus on the individual, is actually the ground on which then that person becomes recruitable.
Yeah.
So do you see, and you have been reporting after your book, you've done some coverage in Maharashtra, which also, I think, on which you have things to say. So Kunal, do you see any hope of fixing that brokenness?
No, I think one perspective that we often miss, and this is something that I found, while traveling with some of these pop stars, as I call them in the book. I spent about 4 years with them. I sort of went to their villages, I traveled to their performances, and I got to know people around them so well, and the circumstances so well. And then one of the things that I really wanted to do in this book is to try and understand where the hate came from, right? What was the genesis of this hate that they were feeling towards Muslims and towards Christians and so on. And one thing that I did realize is that so very often the perpetrators are often victims themselves. This is a perspective that we almost always miss when we're looking at someone like that in that position.
Probably without exception.
We never see that there could be a story that has driven them to this point. And I would want to make a distinction here. The distinction has to be between the profiteers and the foot soldiers, right? The profiteers get a third term in power. The foot soldiers are still struggling. And that is the distinction that we have to constantly go back and make.
Very good.
Some of the foot soldiers that I spoke to, for instance, now there was this...
Excellent.
This poet, Kamalagne, who I spent, again, 4 years with, and he's one of the 3 characters in my book. He grew up in circumstances which are so different from what you would expect from someone like him, whose poetry is so full of bile against Muslims. When he was growing up, his father's best friend was a Muslim, right? So much so that the Muslims that family would keep coming home. He would go to their home, he would touch their feet and so on. And at some point, the father and the best friend, the Muslim best friend, have a dispute. And things turn really ugly and bitter because there's money involved in it. So much so that Kamal, as a child, he's very distressed at seeing his father, really heartbroken at the loss of his best friend. And so overcome with anger, he once goes and sort of storms and wants to hit that Muslim man. And his father drags him back and slaps him in the middle of the market, right? His father says there's no doing this at all. He was my best friend and I will respect him for that. And that's the end of the story. Now, Kamal is young at this point. He's still in school. He's seen all of this. He's not had a sense of closure. He's not been able to process what happened. But a few years later, he comes in touch with the local right-wing groups, the Bajrang Dals and the VHPs of that area. And they try and make him understand that what happened with him was not an aberration, that this was not about that Muslim best friend. This is about the community, because that community believes in betraying anyone who reposes their faith in them. And so for Kamal, it was an instant understanding and an explanation of the trauma that he had seen and the trauma that he always carried. The question here is, didn't liberal education fail him in trying to make sense and knowing that is not the case? Didn't we all somewhere also collectively fail him? Because again, remember, this is not the BJP years. He told me his first vote that he cast was for Akhilesh Yadav in 2012. So he was someone who didn't care about this till the time he met people who were so dedicated to the cause that they radicalized him to care about it in the manner that they wanted him to, right? And I agree with Harsh. I mean, I see this level of dedication missing on the other side of the divide. We care enough to have conversations over wine and cheese about these things. We sometimes care enough to exit WhatsApp groups, but that's the end of our involvement, right? We just proudly say, I have left WhatsApp groups because I can't stand the communal bile that they throw.
Yeah.
My question is, there has to be more, right? And I see privilege in this room. The question is, how are we going to make use of this privilege? I was in this village called Soe in Bulandshahr, where a Muslim man had been lynched, and I'm pretty certain Harsh has visited the village. One of the things that happened, and I was trying to understand how things were in that village before the lynching, and the son of that man who was lynched, used to tell me that we were shocked that this could happen, because for all of these years, whenever the Hindus in the village would have festivals, we would be the ones cooking it, because we were known for our cooking, so we would be the ones cooking food and sending it over. Similarly, when we had festivals, because we didn't have massive homes, our guests would be staying at Hindu homes through the night. That was the relationship we had, right, before the lynching happens. The thing that he was hurt about the most was not as much that his father was lynched by some people of the village and a majority of them from outside. The thing that hurt him the most is that when the family decided that they can't stay in that village anymore because they didn't feel safe, all of the Hindus of the village stood outside their homes, watching as the bullock cart slowly went outside the village, carrying all the belongings. He showed me videos and photos of that moment that he took, where all of the belongings of the family are loaded on the bullock cart and then they slowly start leaving. And it's the bystanders that hurt him more than what his father had gone through. Mm-hmm. And allow me to say this, but we're all bystanders, right? We're those bystanders who are okay with 200 million people of the country, with people around us, facing the violence and the abuse and the intimidation that they face for doing absolutely anything at all, right? Ola Uber driver who's a Muslim faces cancellations and people call and abuse and say, I'm not going to ride with Muslims. A Zomato driver faces order cancellations and people tweeting saying, I don't want my food delivered by Muslims. I told you of the instance of innocent people who are traveling in trains getting killed because they're Muslims, right? There was an instance where a Muslim woman who won a government flat in Gujarat, in a government housing complex, being denied that house because the local Hindus came and said, we don't want a Muslim staying here. Now, as we speak, people in Himachal Pradesh, people in Delhi are going around in their towns, in villages, in localities in East Delhi, and are asking Muslim shopkeepers to mark their names on their signboards so that Hindus should know who to boycott. And we're all bystanders watching this. Right? We're all okay with this happening as long as it doesn't touch us. And I think we're extremely guilty of everything that is happening in this moment. which is why I say that my complaint is with the privileged people who have the privilege of either speaking out or of doing something, or enabling people like Harsh and Rajni who are actively going out and doing things. Or enabling independent newsrooms, independent media houses who are trying to keep journalism afloat in these times. My problem is we still don't have enough of you going out there and actually putting your money, putting your effort into where you think your your WhatsApp activism belongs. So this is meant to make you uncomfortable, and I hope that it does make you uncomfortable, because we've seen enough and more. As I said, we've reached a point where every aspect of 200 people, 200 million people of our country, every aspect of their lives is being controlled and is being dictated and is being weaponized against them. And we cannot be sitting here, standing and watching and being those bystanders. So I hope that as I said, I hope that we're able to understand and see the lens with which you should see a profiteer, and the radical empathy and the radical love that people like Harsh and Rajni talk about, that we must employ when we see foot soldiers. And lastly, I hope that we make good use of our privilege. It's not good enough, and it breaks my heart, and I mean no disrespect to the 40,000 people who've lost their lives, but it breaks my heart that so many of us have our hearts bleeding for Gaza as it must, but we're so blissfully ignorant of the suffering of the people around them. One of the things that has happened after the book has come out is that I've gone to different cities in the country and spoken about this, and the number of Muslims who come up to me and tell me that this echoes, because they're Muslims who work in big MNCs, who are told that they will not get promotions because the reporting manager doesn't like Muslims. I am told by Muslims in different cities, including so commonly in Bombay, that they are unable to find homes because they're Muslims. And we're all just watching. We're all bystanders to it. My point is, if we don't like it, we're not making it known that we don't like it. And that is something that I hope changes after this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kunal. There is a meme currently floating around, for whatever it's worth, that the opposite of a hero is not a villain. It's a bystander.
Yeah. In fact, just responding in a line, the opposite of Holocaust survivors, Elie Wiesel said, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference.
Absolutely.
And I think the uncaring middle class and rich Indian, I really feel, I love my country so much, but I find us the most uncaring people in the world. The most our capacity to look at suffering and look away. And that is it. And just that little story that you told about Bulandshahr, Muzaffarnagar, almost 50,000 people were displaced from just one or two districts, and they used to live together. So I went to the camp. I remember speaking to this old man. I said, "Ki, आप वापस नहीं क्यों नहीं जा रहे अपने गांव में?" And his answer was, कोई बुलाए तब तो हम जाएं. मैं इंतजार कर रहा हूँ. People I've shared generations with. Let them come and say, please come back.
Ashish, were we always indifferent? Are we, as a people in India, have we been indifferent in this manner historically or in the recent past, or is it something new?
No.
Is it a new virus?
No, I think it is reasonably new, I would say, because I was mentioning to somebody this morning that the kind of thing we now see was unthinkable at one time. Unthinkable.
Yeah. So why? What has? Where do we go from here? What are?
Commercialization is one thing.
Ji?
Commercialization. You take out this thing, Muslims are thrown out. So you somehow your locality becomes more
Profitable.
Sellable.
Pure.
Pure.
So to speak. That's the way you sell. It's
No, because if commerce is the dominant factor, then we're really looking at darkness, because there is no sign on the horizon of the power of the market being in any way shaken or reduced or tempered in the near future. So then what do we have? What is there for us to work with? Because we are not willing to give up. So
No,
then what do we do?
You can at most, there are various ways of doing it. Like for example, the Muslims who are Shia Muslims in the West Coast, there are say about at least six, seven subgroups within that. They are seen as a kind of something quite an asset. So they are not touched. They are, because they are Gujarati speaking and they are in business. So to the power holders think that it is safer to leave them there, and particularly because Daga Khans and others are also put in their words that take care of them. So it's a lot of money involved.
But that doesn't help us across the country.
Yeah, I know that, but this is the one. This is one of the possibilities. And then other thing is this politics, that in which if you can become a insured bank of voters for one party, then of course you have some respite.
But that also we are seeing can be fractured many different ways.
That can be fractured
You know,
many ways.
the question is that why is there not, for example, enough of a love-based mobilization of Hinduness? You know, for example, in one conversation in the family, a relative said very passionately, I'm going to say, गर्व से कहो हम हिंदू हैं, nobody can stop me. So I said, हाँ जरूर बोलो भाई, nobody is stopping you. But would you consider changing that to प्रेम से कहो?
You're saying that.
That's
a nice way of putting it.
And I must say the discussion didn't go very far, but at least I got a distinct feeling that it made him think.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And so I often wonder why we are not seeing more of that. There is, of course, there are people like our Faisal Khan. There's a group in Delhi that has revived the Khudai Khidmatgar.
Pasmanda.
Khudai Khidmatgar. हाँ, मतलब अपने खान अब्दुल गफार खान के ज़माने का, they've revived the group. And if you listen to Faisal's stories, because this is exactly what he's doing. He's literally going town to town, village to village, quoting from both the Quran and the Ramayana, Ramcharitmanas. And he has this beautiful story. He did a yatra from Delhi to the house in Calcutta where Gandhi had stationed himself during the riots. I forget the name of the name of the mansion. I forget. And he says in one place they had spent overnight in some public space, and he says in the morning suddenly he felt a presence, behind him, and for a moment he says, I'm ashamed to say I was afraid, but then he says he turned around and it was the Pandit from the temple nearby, and he had come with the morning chai.
Morning?
पंडित बगल का मंदिर में पंडित जो था वो फैजल और कंपनी के लिए चाय लाया था. So of course now we could argue about whether these are these isolated incidents, and certainly we know that these incidents cannot by themselves counter the machinery. That what was the term you used? Foot soldiers and profiteers.
The profiteers.
So, granted that the political problem will have to be defeated politically.
Yes, that's true.
But...
That's very true. That we forget.
No. There's no... You can't... The problem that is triggered by the lust for political power has to be defeated in the political sphere. But the question is that what is the interface between that political process and that ordinary person who at the moment, in large numbers, is being swept along? So, what in the psyche of that ordinary person can we hope to reach out to?
Yes.
And to what extent is our own cynicism a barrier?
Cynicism is always there. Because it almost seems that you are missing out something. You are missing out something because others are doing it more cleverly. That kind of a thing. And I do not think it will take you very far. That line. But there are other things also. Like, for example, I find that a lot of Muslims have gone into sports,
Yes.
which they didn't go in this numbers. They are, that's one thing. Many and more, despite some questionable things, they have also gone into movies in a
Yes.
big way.
Yeah.
In a big way.
In fact, the success of one particular film about 2 years back, Pathan was 2 years back.
I think a year back.
Was,
Yeah,
Pathan
back.
was a film by with Shah Rukh Khan.
Uh-huh.
And many people read the success, the resounding, it was a terrible film.
Yes.
And yet it made tons of money. And, it got
That's true. Yeah,
it got
yeah.
record-breaking audiences. That was seen actually by many people as an active vote of support for Shah Rukh Khan.
Active?
Active support for Shah Rukh Khan,
Yes.
who does not kowtow.
And also that's the same time when Shah Rukh Khan was elected as the most popular person.
That's right. He is.
In
Yeah.
India.
Yeah. Something to that effect.
Modi must have been miserable.
It was great material for your art, I remember.
I just want to thank the audience for staying back and listening, because listening is also a lost art.
Sahi baat hai.
And for many of you resisted checking your phones in the past 1 hour.
Thanking.
Yeah, the people
really, that's
who
true.
sat there and listened and who did not check your phones, you deserve a medal from us. Yeah, because we didn't temper it with any entertainment or any easy laughs, because that's what was the aim of the discussion.
Yeah. And thank you. I want to join, I think the whole panel, but you said it so well for all of us. Thank you so much for your, not just your physical presence, but the quality of your attention. Much appreciated. Thank you so much. That itself has given me a boost of energy.